So I want to introduce our panelists to you. We have Matthias Maedge. I had to practice pronouncing it, from the International Road Transport Union. Matthias asked a question earlier on, but if you don't know the IRU, it's the voice for commercial road transport in Europe, and Matthias is the General Delegate of the IRU Permanent Delegation to the EU, so welcome to you. Preston Feight, we have already met, Chairman of ACEA Commercial Vehicle Board and President of DAF Trucks. Then from the European Commission, Antti Peltomäki, and Mr. Peltomäki is from DG Grow, rather than DG, we've heard from DG Move, but DG Grow, and is Deputy Director General for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SME. So taking a different perspective, we've already heard from DG Move, so it's very interesting to have a different Director General. Then we have Sergio Barbarino, who is from Procter & Gamble, and again, another perspective, because obviously P&G has a massive logistics operation. We all get our shampoo and toothpaste, delivered through P&G. And Sergio is the Research Fellow at Procter & Gamble R&D, and also Chairman of ALICE. Now, this is a very, very long acronym, but I'll read it all out. The European Technology Platform for Research, Innovation and Market Deployment of Logistics and Supply Chain Management Innovation in Europe. Thank heavens there is an acronym, ALICE. But anyway, I had to tell you, because that's really his background. He's got very much a sort of scientific take on all this. And then we have Michele Ziosi, who is standing in at the last moment for Pierre Lahout, who is, I think, mentioned in the programme. Michele, thank you very much indeed. Michele is from the C&H Industrial Group, which of course includes Iveco, manufacturer of heavy and medium commercial vehicles. So you'll be talking from an Iveco perspective, I presume. So welcome to you all. And so we're not having any actual opening remarks. I just want to talk to each, but I've got to be careful I don't fall off this stage. I'm very conscious I could just suddenly go off here. It'll add a bit of entertainment at some point. Michele, from the Iveco point of view, maybe you can give us a sense of what you're doing as a company in terms of a powertrain. We hear that obviously diesel is still absolutely predominant, but what are you concentrating on?
First of all, thank you very much, Kathy, for the introduction. And actually, I would like to bring your apologies from Pierre, which is stuck in the western of France. Actually, he's very sorry because he really likes talking about actual alternative powertrains. Everyone how lively he can discuss about these kind of things. And just a very short remark on C&H Industrial, because it's a very strange name, but who loves actually vintage is the former Fiat Industrial, so the leader in capital goods. So thanks for the question about alternative fuels. Iveco has been leader in alternative fuels since ages. In his portfolio has a wide range of all options of alternative fuels vehicles, from electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, gas vehicle. First began with compressed natural gas vehicles, and now we are leader. We are actually promoting also liquefied natural gas vehicles for the heavy trucks. The reason were actually various, because the reason why we started with this kind of powertrains, because in terms of environment, the footprint is very low. The reduction of CO2 is about minus 15%. In terms of fuel efficiency, so for the customers is about minus 25%, which is actually very good in terms of so-called total cost of ownership, the cost that the customer should actually stand for bringing ahead the mission of their operation. So both things are the part of the sustainability of this kind of vehicle. The reason why we decided to invest in this kind of vehicles, and at that time we were quite alone, and we are really glad to see now that actually other competitors are putting to the market the same kind of vehicles.
But do you see this as more of an interim technology, and that you will move more towards electric in the future, or not?
Certainly is a technology, which is actually fitting very well with the present. In terms of performances, are comparable with the diesel vehicles. So in terms of, as I said, efficiency, in terms of environmental footprint. But actually, there is actually another further opportunity, because natural gas is a bridge to renewables. Because actually, our engines are also possible to run with biomethane, which is actually gas coming from renewables, both in terms of compressed natural gas and liquefied natural gas. So we see natural gas not only as a present solution, immediate solution, but also for a solution for the future.
And what about market uptake, though? I mean, are the customers there? Because you again, we've talked about needing to have the network, the infrastructure for fuel. Is it there?
Absolutely, the implementation of the network is essential. In fact, we saw as a very positive the adoption of the directive for the deployment of alternative fuel infrastructures, although is implemented rightly, or is starting to be implemented rightly in very few member states, in 8 member states, but where we see actually the growing of the market. So the correlation between the market uptake of the vehicles and the numbers of infrastructure increasing is actually really, really clear. So the answer is that we have vehicles where the infrastructure are there. In certain markets where there are no infrastructure, we have some customers that decided to bring their own stations in order to fulfill the mission they want to do with our light liquefied natural gas vehicle. So why they decide to invest into the refilling station? Because the TCO is still convenient, although they have to spend money for that. Since you were mentioning some facts in the previous panel, we have some facts. We just signed a contract of more than 1,000 vehicles running on LNG from now to 2020 with a French customers, and you can imagine how difficult it is for an Italian brand to be bought by a French customer. So it means that the solution is very good indeed.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, Sergio, you were nodding throughout that as Matthias was talking. So P&G, huge logistics operation. Just a couple of statistics to give us a sense of the size.
Well, we spend several billions in transport and logistics every year. In Europe, we have about, I think, 3 billion ton kilometers, of which, by the way, in the last years, we managed to shift almost a third to alternative road solutions, so short sea shipping or intermodal solution. And I know that I'm, not in the right place to promote that, probably, but I mean, we also work with DAF and Volvo on this very nice project Transformers, looking at load efficiency. And one of the exercises we did was to see what would happen if in Europe we would really shift all the long-distance transport to alternative mode of transport, so rail and short sea shipping. Well, if everything that travels beyond 300 kilometers would not move by road, 60% of the ton kilometers in Europe would still be on the road. So there is no doubt whatsoever that we need to do something about powertrains if we want to meet the climate change targets.
So what are you looking for specifically then? As a customer, as a user of trucks, what do you need?
Well, I mean, if we stay on the powertrain, right now, clearly, powertrains do not represent a challenge to the type of service requirements that we have. It's just a matter of choice and total cost of ownership, and how do we pay for the investment needed in new technology. But what we need now is a breakthrough, right? I mean, the Euro 4, 5, 6 has been incremental. We need something more exponential, because if we need to meet the climate change target, it's very critical that we set aggressive targets for 2030 and even more aggressive targets for 2050. But what we are going to do in the next 10 years is really crucial, or we are never going to get there. So,
but as a company, what are you, when you are deciding which trucks you're going to use, which criteria are you applying? Because I mean, it matters to you how much you can load, how much freight you can load onto a truck. It matters to you how much it costs. How do you get all these balances right?
So, complex question. So, if you take a company like P&G, we contract out all our transport. So freight logistic emissions for us are so-called Scope 3 emissions. So if you look at any company sustainability report, typically nobody does accounting for Scope 3 emissions. So one of the things we are looking at is, first of all, how do we incorporate it in our report? And it's not easy. First of all, because there is no methodology agreed. There is a beautiful initiative, the GLEC, the Global Logistic Emission Council, that is trying to agree with all the different transport actors, road, rail, aviation, what a agreed methodology at the global level should be. And I'm very happy that they are doing it, and we really need it. So if we want to set any target, first of all, we need to agree on the measurement. Once we get that, we would like to start reporting it, and then setting aggressive targets. We know that even if it's a Scope 3 emission, we have a lot to say on how much emission will be generated, because we generate a lot of transport. We can sign contracts with our transport service provider to allow them to do the investments. So it needs to make sense economically, as you said before. I mean, there are huge opportunities on load efficiency, and some of these opportunities belong to us. I mean, we have been driving load efficiency by mixing products that cube out faster than they weigh out, and products that they weigh out faster than they cube out. And the opportunity is huge. It's 40–50% more capacity if you mix product together. And in my company, we have the luck that we have this category of products under our roof. But the big challenge is, how do we collaborate across industry so that if I make heavy steel bars, I can carry, I don't know, shoes on top of them. That's really difficult. And we've been trying now for the last 7–8 years. We have solved the economic gain sharing models. We have solved the legal antitrust model for collaborative transport, but we still have a problem of how to operationalize it.
So thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Antti Peltomäki from DG Grow. We've already obviously heard how very, very important transport and road transport is to the economy of Europe. Are we moving fast enough to decarbonize our road transport if we look at what's happening in China and some other countries?
I think that, of course, we all understand the challenge that I think when we have been committing to Paris Agreement, and of course I think that we are having kind of those kind of systems or kind of sectors that are outside of the ETS, and then of course I think we have to look at what is the kind of a role that the whole of the transport have to, I think, provide for finding the solutions. And of course, I think in that respect, I think that the kind of targets are relatively ambitious, and of course I think that's why I wouldn't say that I think that we are, I think that really yet there, but of course I think that we are working hard, and I think that we're trying really to understand what are the ways and means to address these issues. And of course I guess that what has been, I think, those mobility packages that I guess that Henrik Hollolei was already talking about earlier today in here, so that I think that this has been kind of a way really to address these issues and to understand that how kind of, let's say, stringent kind of obligations we are putting on kind of those who are trying to provide the solutions, really, I think, at kind of a commercial basis.
Somebody mentioned before about Tesla coming out with their new battery-operated truck. When you see something like that, again, do you think that Europe is moving fast enough towards those sort of solutions, or is that still a long way off? And again, do you stay with the technology neutrality that seems to be the Commission position?
I'm not engineer, so that I'm a lawyer from Commission, so that I'm not in a position really to make any kind of a judgment that I think how competitive this kind of electric powered kind of a heavy duty vehicle from Tesla actually is. Perhaps some more expertise around might be, or somewhere in the audience. But of course, I think that that's perhaps, I think, kind of what Tesla has been doing. I think that being kind of a first mover, and then I think that giving certain kind of very ambitious promises, that I think that they are making them competitive, and let us see. Of course, I think that so far we have understood that I think that, of course, diesel has been, I think, the kind of, let's say, the solution for heavy-duty vehicles, because it has been very reliable, and I think the cost-effective way of powering the kind of heavy-duty vehicles. And of course, I think so far we haven't had our doubts that whether kind of electric vehicles are yet the solution on the kind of heavy-duty side. But I think that definitely we are all, I think, that keen on seeing that where the kind of new technologies are providing us the solutions.
Okay, thank you, Matthias from the International Road Transport Union. You asked a question before, obviously worried about potential targets being set for trucks and buses in the future. Where do you see the real challenges ahead?
I think our membership, so the operators, I think, Eric, you mentioned it, we're buying like 350,000 vehicles from you, and we of course we will buy more when we listen to what we've heard in terms of market projections. We will buy more vehicles, and we want to buy the most sustainable, but at the same time the most cost-efficient solution as well. So I think we really have to talk about CO2 abatement costs. It's nice to talk about silver bullets, but every gram CO2 reduced on the vehicle, we have to pay a price for that. And we should not forget that. I actually have a suggestion. We shouldn't call the event powertrain options. I think we should call it powertrain choices, because you have mature technology outside, and that is a choice to make. I heard concerns about infrastructure, but I would really like to encourage the Commission and every stakeholder to join us in promoting, supporting operators to invest in the technology, to ease their concern, to go to a new technology, be an early adopter, because I've worked with energy companies before. Infrastructure, yes, we lack infrastructure, and Hendrik was totally right with what he said, but we have an opportunity if we support operators, and if you have a guaranteed turnover of any type of fuel or energy carrier, I find you energy companies who will build the station for you. So it's a relative discussion. And I would also like to go back a little bit in time. A couple of years ago, I supported AirTruck as an expert to work on a study on powertrains and energy carriers. We only talk about powertrains, but I think we need to distinguish between the energy carrier and how you store the energy carrier. Because my industry is heavily dependent on long distance, on heavy loads, and there is energy density debates. Diesel is the best fuel. Why is that? Why are you doing LNG? LNG is, of course, coming very close to the qualities and the properties of diesel in terms of energy density, and this is providing flexibility to operators. Operators need flexibility, planning flexibility when they plan their operations. So we really, and I would like to laud for discussing with you. We just joined, I just signed and approved the membership in Alice's RU. So I look forward to discussing how aggressive the targets should be, because if we are too aggressive and we are too ambitious on the ambition, we can also destroy markets, because the operators are dependent on buying products which are on the market and in line with realistic targets, as we heard before. And having said that, and linking back to my question and then back to the discussion, why did I ask for acknowledgement of renewable fuels? When our industry is so dependent on the combustion engine, because let's be honest, we need an honest debate, and the battery as a storage medium is not the solution. We just had a meeting with a green group that all of you know in Brussels, who said, yes, electrification is the ultimate future. I said, I don't even necessarily disagree with you, but you can, of course, talk about, is electricity stored in a battery, in a liquid, or in a gaseous fuel? And this is what we have to talk about. And how can operators contribute? So I'm eager to understand if now the Commission proposal on the CO2 standard would actually give us an opportunity to contribute by rewarding emission reduction benefits on the fuel side, as I have circled out in my question before. And the Clean Vehicles Directive is putting some questions to us, because we're seeing a good proposal. At the same time, there is in public tendering and a proposal to double count, to double reward electric vehicles, so zero emission on the tailpipe, tank to wheel. But there is also a reward system put forward on acknowledging biomethane, when natural gas vehicles run on a renewable fuel, and also count that twice. And that is then the well-to-tank approach. So what to believe in when the Commission is saying, but once the standard is in place, we're going to take that back away again and only look at the tailpipe. I think that's really, really wrong. And I hope we can discuss really a paradigm change, a policy change, when it comes to considering what commercial vehicles are able to contribute.
So, Preston, you've heard a few things coming up now. I mean, in terms of sort of, if you had your magic wand moment, what do you actually need most of all to really make the markets want alternative powertrains, that really create a market for you?
Well, I think I'd come back to the comments in our general session or introductory session and saying that, first of all, they want safety. then they need the reliability in the vehicle, and then they need the operating cost.
And is the reliability there yet in terms of alternative powertrains? What's been happening in terms of the research? I mean, we're seeing lots of companies flying flags and saying we're doing great things, but is the reliability there?
It depends upon the technology, I think. And so I think that the current greater than 90% of diesel engines, the reliability is extremely high. I think that for electric vehicles, the potentials are there, but the volumes haven't been there to kind of create that base. And I think the same could be said for all the alternative fuels. None of this is impossible. It just takes a maturity level for that reliability statement. So for the safety, I think they all have the opportunity of being safe. They all have the opportunity of being reliable. Commercial viability for the operator's benefit is really, to me, the deciding factor right now of what's going to drive the industry forward. Because when I think about it from whether it's Procter & Gamble's or any other customer standpoint, they won't accept an answer that doesn't make them competitive in the world. They can't. And we shouldn't ask them to. We should allow them to have solutions that make them able to compete in their playing field as well.
And what do you think, any of you, about the whole idea of introducing mandates? The European Commission pulled away from that as an incentive. I mean, we're seeing it done in California. We're seeing it being done, obviously, in China. It's much more nuanced, the way that the Commission is approaching to reward the industry for making progress. Is that the right thing? I mean, does anyone have a view on that?
I can start, and then you can go, because I mean, I'd look at it and say, I think the way that we do in a free market society of letting technology develop the right answers is the absolute right approach. It's been proven over centuries. That's the right way to run an economy. And we run the economies that way. And I hope we continue to run them that way and let the right decisions that are commercially viable come to the market as they should.
But Antti, can I just bring you in here? That, I mean, in terms of competition, was it the right thing to do when you're seeing countries like China able to push ahead because they are using very strong mandates and quotas?
I think that we have been, applying this kind of a technological neutrality kind of a principle, and I guess that's still valid. And I guess that we believe that I think that we, in terms of really, I think that setting certain objectives, and I think that then turning them to certain kind of targets, that as we did with the kind of light-duty vehicles now, I think that then we leave the kind of choice for the kind of companies really to make their choices. Of course, we know that it's whenever you are having so many different kind of promising technologies available, and I think that when I think that discussing about the infrastructure side, so that I think how many kind of parallel systems you are building up at the same time. But of course, I think that for us, I think that it was quite important that I think that we are allowing the kind of this be market-driven. Of course, I think then there is a certain kind of incentivizing kind of a model, but I think that really trying still to keep it open for the market operators to meet the targets, because we are mainly, I think, interested that I think that we are addressing this climate challenge, and I think at the same time we keep our industry competitive.
Matthias?
I think we have to be careful when it comes down to mandates, because we may risk promoting technologies which are still heavily subsidized. And I think industry would not agree to mandates if there wouldn't be a mandate for operators to purchase them from them. So this is a risky discussion. And again, there is alternatives already available. We must use them. And you know, it's always funny when we talk about fleet renewal. And let me take the passenger transport side as an example. The coach tourism sector is very advanced in terms of Euro 6 penetration, while urban mobility and city buses could still catch up. So fleet renewal is of course essential, and then you could also use biofuels in such vehicles. But when you also see CNG buses and all that sort of thing outside, or hybrids, maybe you saw as well in the media, it was all over the media yesterday, Germany is furious about now switching to electric buses overnight, and they put an amazing amount of 350 million euros on the table. How many buses will it give you? 400. How many CNG buses would it give you? 3,500 maybe? How many hybrids? 2,000? I don't know. We can make the calculations. Don't nail me on the details. But this is a bit where we are. We need a more realistic discussion and already use the alternatives that are out there, and threatening the industry that we go and buy products somewhere else It's just a total different reason why technologies have been developed in some parts of the world, and we should be supporting proudly what the industry is doing so far. Of course, operators will continue to challenge the industry. We always want to have better and cheaper products, but we have to work together, and this is a bit where we are. It's a little bit unfair to just go zero emission and say this is the solution. Transport is more colorful, as well as transport operators. We have 10 vehicles doing 10 different jobs. You look at the type of job that you have to do, you decide your vehicle. You look at the country where you are, you look whether the electricity price is interesting. If it's around 10 cents per kilowatt hour or less, we can maybe have a business case. If it's 30 or even more cents per kilowatt hour, there will not be whatsoever business case. So I think this is or the climate. Is it a mountainous region? Sometimes it's making total sense to go hybrid, and sometimes it's maybe more intelligent to do something else like gas. So I think this is a bit the type of discussion that we have to have, honest and reasonable. And transport is colorful, and there's not thousands of options. There is good options out there. I also believe that hydrogen fuel cell is interesting, but it's of course terribly expensive still. But you have what we need: quick refueling time, autonomy. So these are the arguments that operators need. And then again, for the best price. And
I mean, you mentioned about fleet renewal. I mean, at the moment, what percentage of the fleet is Euro 6? It's a very small percentage, isn't it? 1%. So, I mean, how do you go about then updating the fleet? We've already got that sort of technology within diesel. What is needed to be able to try to penetrate and make a difference?
If I may add something related to the question before answering this one, since you mentioned China and America, US, sometimes it's forgotten that in the last 20 years, the European industry of truck manufacturing reduced CO2 emissions of about 30%. I know it's not such popular things to say right now, but we shouldn't forget that, because it seems that diesel is not a solution anymore, but diesel has been a pillar to reduce CO2 for many, many years. It's going to be for other years to come. So this is something that I would like to underline before going to your question. I don't know, about diesel, the reason why diesel, the uptake, I would say, is not such spread is maybe because there is no harmonized policy among all member states. Is not clear the regulatory framework from now on. For example, now we see new law restricting, actually, for example, the access to city is not maybe the case of long-haul trucks, but so actually the policy is actually not clear. So customers maybe are retained to buy diesel vehicles because nobody knows what's happened in the next future. So what is needed is a real clear perspective for all choices, as Matthias said.
So, well, how do you achieve that certainty? I mean, what do you think, Sergio? If people are holding back because of the uncertainty, what creates the certainty?
So let me go back 1 second to the fact that this panel is about long-distance transport, while the next one is about urban logistics. So when it comes to urban logistics, you don't need the Commission to give the mandates. Some cities are imposing mandates.
Well, we will talk about that,
and that's where it will be coming from in the city. And in the city, CO2 is not the main problem. The main problem are all the other emissions, because you have promiscuity with people breathing in the streets. So, and I repeat again, that's 60% of the problem. So I think it should start absolutely from there. When it comes to long-distance transport, my point is we need to have science-based targets and life cycle analysis for any solution. It needs to pay for itself. In P&G, we say if sustainability is costing you money, you're doing it wrong. Because if we want to be sustainable, we need to be resource efficient. In this world, if you're resource efficient, you should be cheaper. If you are not cheaper, it means that there is some carbon footprint hidden in the number somewhere. So we need to be very careful that it needs to make sense on all sides. And the other thing is, I prefer much more, I work for a company that put products in the market, and you buy them because you like them. Nobody imposes you to buy Pampers or Allier or Gillette, right? And so working on the performance and on the product and making them irresistible is a much better policy than forcing down the throat of everybody a solution that then we discovered 10 years later was a huge mistake.
Preston, you're nodding.
I agree.
What a surprise. Do we have any questions from the floor? You're very quiet now. So in your, Sergio, going back to your life cycle analysis, I mean, so what are the factors then that you're looking for, and how long are you, I mean, you're talking about, how long is the life cycle?
The life cycle is defined from raw materials, production, manufacturing, actual utilization of the vehicle, and end of life. Now, I say this here, it's maybe a bit futuristic, but let me say that. With autonomous vehicles, I think it comes for this industry a huge opportunity of stopping selling the vehicles and selling what the vehicles does. So transport services, mobility services. So you become, on top of manufacturer, you become a fleet manager. So they will join IRU maybe. If you do that, then you have full control of the fleet. You can make the fleet enormously more efficient, full control of carbon footprint, full control of the end of life. You can retire the vehicle when it's economically right to do so. You can have much faster fleet deployment and redeployment, so faster cycles, so it's easier. You said Euro 6, only 1%. If the vehicle manufacturer would control the circulating fleet, probably they've already reached the economic conclusion that some trucks are really beyond their due date and need to be retired. So there is an enormous opportunity. I mean, there are business models like this. I don't know if you know, for jet engines, Rolls-Royce, for example, does not sell the engines anymore. They do engine management, so they charge by the hour. I mean, we would love to see that happening, because that is going to put much better control on all that is circulating, and then we will be able to really move much faster to much better technology that make economic sense.
Let me put that then to some of the panel then. Changing a business model, I mean, what do you think from the Commission perspective? Do you think that we should be thinking, the industry should be thinking more in terms of service maybe, to make it more affordable for customers and to speed up the market uptake?
Perhaps minor caveat, so that I think that's perhaps not really on our competency, DG Grow. It's more Henrik, who was speaking here earlier today. But I think the kind of mobility as a service is kind of a concept that, of course, I guess that I think that's emerging, and I guess that there are a lot of kind of already commercial type of the pilots taking place. And let us see how it's developing. But I truly believe that it's definitely going that direction. I guess that different type of the consumer products, like the fridges, I think that I was just last week in a kind of other type of the event, where I think that was very well-known German kind of a home appliances producer, who was, I think, that asking the audience whether you want to buy or lease your fridge. And I think that then more than half were ready to lease it. I don't want to have my freezer or kind of a fridge owned if someone keeps it always up to date.
Okay, well, let's say buy or lease then. I mean, what do you think, Preston? Is it that sort of business model? Is it a viable option?
Buying or leasing of vehicles is not a new concept. It's one that's mature in the market really right now.
Of course, but I mean, in this very specific thing, where it would possibly be different because you'd be measuring lots of other elements.
I don't know if it's different. I think at the end of the day, I keep circling back to this. My mind always works to the idea that it starts and ends with what the customer's needs are, right? And that we have to be really careful to not allow ourselves as an industry group or a group of panelists or the government or industry executives to be away from the customer, right? So all our models should center out on what makes sense for them. And I think that's where we have to keep ourselves centric. It's really easy to get too smart for ourselves. And we just got to let them have a series of choices. That's why it's good to have competition and have a series of choices and let them choose for their business, as was said earlier, Matthias, that 10 different cities, 10 different duty cycles, 10 different choices might be made. And so we shouldn't drive it to them, we should let them drive it, and we need to be flexible as an industries to provide them the right choices on technologies for powertrain to make it work. Obviously, with the high use of diesel right now, that's the technology that's working the best right now. Otherwise, they would choose something different because we would bring something different. But the world will move forward, and we will be ready to meet that, as was spoken about, through either natural gas or electric. That can be a purchase model, and it can be a lease model. It can be alternative fuels. It can be biofueled. I think we just have to really remember to be careful about deciding for others when they'll make good decisions for themselves.
But how long does that take for the market to make the decisions, if you like? I mean, there has to be some nudging along the way, doesn't there? And as a company, don't you have to make some really big decisions? Otherwise, you get left behind.
To the latter part of your question, absolutely. And that's a good nervousness to have, of making the right levels of investments in the right products so that we stay current. There's a history in the world of companies that have failed in that regard, and that's okay, right? We're comfortable in that operating environment that we have to make good decisions. I would say that from a performance standpoint, being nudged along isn't necessary any more than the customer drives it, because as we said today, CO2 reduction is in everybody's interest. It's in the environmental interest, and it's in the customer's interest, because CO2 reduction is fuel economy improvement. And that's their number one operating cost in long-haul trucking. So when you look at it that way, there's not a nudge necessary, there's just a clarification of what we are going to be able to achieve in the coming 8 or 10 years. If you look backwards, as we said earlier, we've achieved a 1% reduction in CO2 on the last 13 years, so 13%, greater than 10% changes without that nudging. And I would expect that going forward, we will all do as much as we absolutely possibly can to continue that trend. Having said that, we're not opposed to working together to set the right standards, but we just make sure we measure the standards right and don't lose sight of the customer.
Mm-hmm. Matthias, yeah.
If I can just come in very quickly. I think there is no rocket science in terms of business cases, and we already hire vehicles, and the discussion when it's down to costs and competition on posting our workers, and it's refreshing to discuss technology today, but we should never forget that our business, the road transport industry, is 80% small and medium-sized enterprises. We are having companies with 2 or 3 vehicles where a father is driving with a son and his cousin, or a daughter or whatever. And by the way, we want more women in transport. We signed a declaration last Monday with Commissioner Bulc. But what we need is consistency. If you want to bring those alternatives to the market, and I can tell you only this little quick story. I've worked over 5 presidencies on the Energy Taxation Directive, which ended up the price of CO2, it was proposed 20, and it ended up 12 euro per ton of CO2. That, in terms of fuel tax, means 85% would have been taxed on energy and 15% on CO2. Ridiculous. You want to promote CO2, low carbon CO2 fuels, and you basically need for long haul high energy content. It's good for efficiency, but you penalize this with a high tax, and then there's a small part left for CO2. So we need consistency, and I know that the Commission is looking again at how we can tackle tank tourism and make energy taxation right. But and this is my plea, our business, the long haul business, and you touched upon, we go now to urban, but we will run combustion engines for the decades to come. And we need clarity on having the opportunity to use biofuels and LNG and still be able to do the last mile and enter the city. This is also for coach tourism what we are dependent on, and this is my plea. This is where we have to work on. And there is, of course, interesting solutions. We worked on transformers together, on-demand hybrid stuff, and all of that is coming, for sure. But we will use combustion engines that run on these fuels in the decades to come, and we need to be very clear and honest about that.
Let's take a question from the audience here.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Charles Sweeney from Fleet Transport in Ireland. Just a general comment in relation to the solutions that our colleague from Procter & Gamble. Do we not think that the whole aspect should take in real estate and also the whole last mile, like our colleague from our IRU, but the fact that for the city deliveries, for the hubs outside of the cities, they're becoming more and more expensive to buy the site and to establish the actual construction of the buildings, and that's prohibitive. And what is existing today may not be CO2 friendly. So should there be some infrastructure incentives to look at the actual whole aspect of the transportation, logistics, supply chain, in reducing the carbon footprint from once it, was described earlier, from the raw material source to the manufacturing to the distribution hub. And I know the concentration primarily today is on the actual manufacturer of the commercial vehicle to reduce that the onus is on them. But I think the onus should be spread across the whole supply chain in that respect. And I just want to get your comments on that, please.
Yeah, Sergio.
Good, excellent question, actually. So first of all, the project increase on freight needs between now and 2050 is 300% from where we are today. If you would utilize fully the capacity in Cuban weight load of the existing fleet, you would only need 50% more capacity. Now, that has an effect on infrastructure, of course, because one thing is to provide infrastructure for 300% of the traffic, another thing is to provide infrastructure for a 50% increase of the traffic. Now, the good news is that there is going to be an increase. We had a fantastic workshop with Jean-Luc Lassalle last month on the issue of there is an increasing need of logistic space for urban distribution. I mean, today before coming here, I was working from home and I received the parcel from Amazon, like probably many of you are experiencing. So there is an incredible increase in this type of services. Now, the reality is that if you look at the way logistic space is used today, typically most logistics centers are active only a few hours a day. So there is a business model change needed there as well, in which rather than charging by square meter, you charge by the flow of goods. And then you have an incentive to move as many goods as possible and make the best use possible of this available space, rather than building these mega logistic monsters and then they're utilized a couple of hours a day. That's number one. And same, of course, for all the infrastructure, road infrastructure that goes with that. If you are more efficient, you require less of it. And of course, road infrastructure comes into the life cycle analysis. So you should not take it out, because otherwise, you're going to hide this famous carbon footprint somewhere else. The one thing I want to say also is freight logistics is only 7% of the total emissions of Europe today. It's bound to grow if we don't do something. But one thing people don't realize is that I was at home and this parcel from Amazon arrived. If somebody would have asked me to take my car and go pick it up, that would have been the most horrible, inefficient way to move that parcel around. So freight logistics, if shopping is going to be more like you order online and you receive at home, may have an enormous impact on people mobility. And people mobility is today the biggest part of the problem. So we really need to look at it holistically, not compartmentalized by people transport and logistic transport alone. I remind you that when London organized the Olympics, Transport for London made an economic analysis that the opportunity cost of delivering freight on time was much higher than delivering people on time, only that freight doesn't vote and people do. But because everybody loved the Olympics, they managed to get it their way, and in the end, and if you know London is a disaster from a road infrastructure standpoint, everything worked perfectly.
Road charging. Why are we...
Microphone.
Thank you so much, but a coach could represent 30 cars, and we include that in road charging. So let's take a step back and not talk about powertrains and fuels. Use commercial road transport. It's the best way to move people and goods in the EU. Sorry.
We are talking about powertrains, though. Do we have any? Yes, another question there.
Yes, hello. This is Nikos Xidas from the World LPG Association, the European LPG Association. That was a question, in fact, that I wanted to ask also from the first session, but I think it fits also well into this one. We said a lot about technology-neutral approach, and we cannot agree more than that. We should have technology-neutral approach. We said also that the solution can be a combination of various options, depending on the customer and on the need. We said that we do not want to transport batteries, but we do want to transport goods, of course. I heard also from Matthias Maedge, who said that the industry is very nervous. He said that we need to have an honest debate, and we fully agree. We said that we need to have realistic discussions. We talked about infrastructure. We don't have infrastructure. We need to build infrastructure. And somebody said, I don't remember who, that we'll always find an energy company to pay for it. But what we have not heard about is that there is a product, there is an alternative fuel, the LPG, which has the infrastructure. It ticks actually all the boxes. It is available. It has the infrastructure. It ticks the boxes of the emission. It ticks the boxes of the pricing. But the question is, why do we not talk about it? Why is this not part of the solutions that we hear today?
But maybe we should invite someone from LPG sector, I don't know, because actually it is one of the choice. For example, in Italy, because I'm coming from Italy, LPG is quite spread as a solution for sustainable mobility. In comparison to natural gas, there are a few differences and in favor of natural gas, but still is incentivized, subsidized, and is a part of sustainable mobility projects in some countries, at least in the country where we are actually acting as manufacturers in the automotive, in the car sectors. Differently in the trucks sector, because actually it's not such an efficient solution as diesel and LNG, but in the car sectors I think is a solution.
Did you want to get, Sergio, did you want to come in? No. So it is part of the solution. We're just kind of going to draw to a close, but I just wonder whether I could ask you all to sort of cast your mind forward, and I don't know how far to leap forward here. I mean, can I say to 2030, or is that not far enough? But that's the date set by the Commission. But if we're then going to be driving along the motorways and seeing our trucks transporting all our stuff from P&G, what are we going to see? What sort of vehicles are going to be there? I mean, maybe that's too short a time frame to make a big impact from today. But generally, in the future, what would be your ideal solution and an ideal picture in road transport? Maybe you could start.
Yeah, actually, I'm finished with what I said at the beginning. For what I see actually in the future on our motorway is trucks maybe without driver running on LNG, because actually the autonomy will be, and it's already actually quite high, almost actually 2,000 kilometers. The environmental impact is pretty low in terms of CO2, in terms of pollutants. So also the safety is comparable to the conventional trucks. So everything we need and everything the Commission is foreseeing in the last communication of decarbonization is already into LNG trucks.
Sergio, what would you be seeing? What would you hope for?
I'm not going to be popular here. 10 years ago, I was at a panel debate like this one, and somebody from the public said that the long-distance electric truck exists already, it's called the train. And that's what I would like to see. Honestly, we have been struggling, but we managed to move 20-25% of our ton-kilometer to rail, but the railway sector in Europe is nowhere to be found to provide the right service. And we're still struggling, and we have every year we have another blow, like this summer in Germany, where all our intermodal lanes were cut because somebody decided to do works and there was no business continuity plan. This is unacceptable. In the US, 40% of the transport is done by rail. In Europe, we are building high-speed networks, so we have a pre-existing rail network that can be used for freight. We should get our act together for rail. And for the rest, because there is going to be still road movements in 2030 done by truck, I'm waiting for this panel to tell me what we need to buy.
So, Antti Peltomäki.
This is a really kind of personal kind of a guess, but I think that whatever we learn from the OEMs, what they are doing on kind of light-duty vehicles, and I think what kind of plans they are having, and then I think that they're also kind of globally. Of course, I expect that there are plenty more kind of electric-powered vehicles. Whether it's high-duty vehicles, I think that I believe that I think all these kind of alternatives, LNGs and others, are quite kind of possible solutions. whenever looking kind of for ships today, I think that they used to be all kind of diesel engines. I think now they are the new kind of ships are mainly, I think, that powered by LNG. So I think that that's kind of a possibility. But I think I hope that 2030 I'm still allowed to go there with my old Harley Davidson.
Okay, sure.
Yes.
I think in 2030, which is a pretty short time frame,
It is, I know. Yeah.
I think that what I would envision will be vehicles which are safer than today, because I think technology will give us those safety capabilities, for more assistance features for drivers. I would imagine degrees of autonomy improving and increasing into the marketplace. I would say that the market will require and will get vehicles which are durable and reliable, so it'll have lower acquisition costs than today possibly, as well as better residual values on the back for vehicles that deliver freight efficiently. And I think from a powertrain, where we're here today, I think it will be a mixture. I think there will still be a significant utilization of diesel engines. I think they're very efficient, and I think that they will be continue to be the moving factor in the over-the-road sector. I think there will be augmenting technologies vis-a-vis natural gas and biofuels where they are appropriate and where there's an energy independence capability or cost benefit to them. And I think electrification, or hybridization at least, will have a significant role as we move towards urban environments, so that the nucleus of a city will likely see a greater degree of electrification and 0 mile or 0 emissions output in those urban environments driven by local legislation. But I think it's going to be a mixture, and it's going to be appropriate to the market.
And will the Commission's grants and financial instruments that it's providing for refueling infrastructure, will that have made a difference by then? Will we see that money will have really changed anything in terms of the fueling infrastructure?
It's a hard question to answer. The numbers are huge to make the right levels of investments to change the infrastructure, and I think personally, I think it's a better model to let the industry, whether that's the energy industries or the power companies, decide what that model will look like. And I think their onboarding, because there's a need for it, will be what drives the infrastructure changes appropriately at the end of the day.
Okay, Matthias.
Yeah, of course, we need to support more infrastructure. I come to the 2030 question, but the infrastructure argument is, of course, interesting, and we also agree it's not ambitious enough what the member states have put forward. It's just mind-blowing when we mention CEF. Refresh my memory, 22 billion, 21 point something went into rail. So how much went into clean alternative energy infrastructure for road? I think we have to be honest again. 60% increase, and now the bucket is drying out in terms of financial support, and we now have a last blending call. I think it's simply not serious. But again, I think we have mature technology, and operators need more financial support, because when operators are committed, infrastructure is coming. And only one remark to the question from the floor. Operators have to trust that there are smart engineers at work who test all fuels and energy carriers and powertrains to come up with workable and doable solutions. I mentioned energy content, and I know that LPG is a car fuel for retrofitting cars, but we don't see it to be a commercial fuel. 2030, 10% of the market alternatives, that would be nice. 90% diesel, obviously. 10% alternatives. Most promising alternative, in my opinion, LNG.
Okay, you heard it here, folks.
We are long haul. Eh? If we talk city, it's more colourful.
No, we're talking long haul. We're talking long haul. Well, thank you all very much indeed. I think you've sort of thrown up some interesting points there and very interesting discussion. So thank you very much indeed.